sure. For
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's great to meet you, man. Thank you for taking a minute out today, and I'd love to begin our conversation before we get into your
Yeah,
very storied career with
yeah,
you know A-list clients by
yeah.
asking you 4 years ago we were wrapping our heads around this global pandemic. And
Hmm.
now that we've come out of it, I'm curious, how did you survive that time period and how did it change you?
Well, I tell you, for me, I didn't have to adapt much because I had already adapted pre-COVID.
Yeah.
I had left my previous role and started LiquidMind, and we kind of had a virtual team ready to go, and so our adaptability was almost immediate to COVID, and kept several clients that we had. So for us, it was just a matter of managing the clients we currently had and adapting to the conditions that were out there. But fortunately, we were already in a position to do that.
So you have a global brand strategy firm, and that's very clear on paper what you do. But if I was to put you in front of a bunch of third graders, it's career day, one of the kids says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
I would say identifying how to disrupt the industry.
Okay.
And for a third grader to have words as thrown around, I find a lot out there, Joe, with people that throw words around like innovation pretty loosely. And disruption is kind of, I always say, innovation on steroids.
Yeah.
And so if you have a mentality of what does disruption mean, it opens up a broad spectrum of opportunities that kids can pursue. And it never ends. And so there's always an opportunity. And I learned that a long time from Steve Jobs is finding an opportunity to disrupt and put a dent in the universe wherever you can.
So the first thing that came into my mind when you said that was I'm thinking about Phil Knight having running shoes at Nike,
Hmm.
and they take a chance on this young kid from North Carolina. There was no way that he was going to sign, but they somehow believed that he would sign. And I'm always amazed when I see that swoosh now at how disruptive that was in a positive way for them. Because he was fine being a running guy.
Yeah.
I mean, but are you kind of talking a little bit like that? Like, really? I mean, that's an extreme example, but along those lines?
Well, I would say disruption. Now, when you go back, and I read Sue Dog, and I think it's a great story with Phil Knight. And when I look at Nike, Nike's selling a lifestyle. There's a difference between disruption and selling a lifestyle. And I always go back to Ralph Lauren's quote, where he said, "We're not selling a product, we're selling a lifestyle. What's your point of difference?" And really, at the time, when you look at Michael, they were taking care of him as an individual and as a person. And they just so happened to believe in the product and the authentic product that they were delivering to Michael. And kind of the other side of that spectrum on disruption, when I look at it, is what does disruption look like? I look at Nike as being authentic, selling a lifestyle that people can embrace and aspiring to be a great athlete like Michael. That's what they do. And when I look at disruption, I look at something like the iPod, with Steve. Nobody knew that it was going to disrupt the music industry. They just thought it was a music player.
Yeah.
Little did they know the weapon that he had in his hand at the time. So to me, that's disrupting an industry versus innovating and authentically selling a lifestyle like Nike did with Michael.
I remember when the iPad came out. I'm an IT technician by day for a large school district in Kansas City. And
Okay.
I remember when the iPad came out, people were like making fun of the name and why would someone want something this clunky and big? And of course, who would have known? I'm sure
Yeah.
he did that it would get there. But I've seen a viral clip of Steve Jobs at one of his keynote speeches. And one of the guys was talking about speed, processing speed, faster technology. And he stopped the guy and said, "Look, we're here to create a customer experience. We're here to create something that's comfortable." And I think that's the thing that Apple has always done, even when he exited the stage. Their customer support is the way it is because it's domestic, it's effective, and you always feel good when you're done. And that's the reason why their products are expensive, because their customer support is always going to be something reliable in a dialect or language. And I'm not trying to knock any other countries and how we
Yeah.
outsource, but it's just a comfortable experience. You feel good when you go into the store and you feel good when you call. So in a roundabout way, he's constantly created a model that's disrupted everybody else's model.
Yeah, and you'll find what's interesting, when I worked at Oakley, for example, one of the greatest visionaries that I've been around personally was Jim Gennard. And Jim Gennard had this affinity for Steve. And you think, well, what's the connecting point? You have this tech guy and you've got this innovator in the consumer products industry. How do these two dots connect? And Steve had a different mentality towards product. Three words I always remember with Steve is simple as sophisticated. It's a beautiful, I'm very much about when people talk about products, how do they talk about the products? Do they talk about it as just a point of difference or as a beauty piece that can be easily used? And Steve was famously said as well is that if you have to read the instruction manual, it's too hard. So I remember even when the iMac came out and he said 1, 2, 3, pull it out of the box, plug it in, and hit the start button. That's 1, 2, 3. So I find that, Joe, where people look at it, and for me the connecting points are how, and you talk about adaptability, is you can do that in product and you can do that in branding. You can do that with how you position your company. And Steve had done that at all levels, at a premium level, to your point. He looked at all the details. He said, if you've got the greatest product in the world and it's the easiest product to use, but your customer service sucks, it's a bad experience. And
Yeah.
so you have to have the funnel complete vertically with the brand in order to be successful.
So what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream to grow up and become?
In North Dakota, I think it was to become a football player.
Yeah.
I didn't have this aspiration, which interestingly enough, I have an industrial engineering degree. I started out in the aerospace industry and quickly pivoted, started my own company, an apparel company, and learned everything from the bottom up. I was sewing buttons and putting zippers on pants and wanted to learn everything. And so my aspiration was, number one, to be successful and move out of North Dakota at some point, but to be successful as a football player. And I ended my career at Nebraska and finished up at University of North Dakota and got my degree there.
So
I
what has
played
been
football there.
yeah, well, what has been this consistent drive in you? Obviously, you wanted to get out of North Dakota. You
Yeah.
made it out. You've been successful. But what were these gears that were put in motion, seeds that were planted that became you?
Well, I had I didn't say it was a tough upbringing, but it was certainly a hardcore blue collar upbringing. And we had to go through a lot of tough times. So for number one for me was not to have to go through that as an adult. And how do you prepare yourself to do that? So I was brought up independent as a fault. I call it as a fault, meaning that my parents prepared me very early on in life to be independent and make it on your own. And so for me, I always adapted that way, and I worked my way through college. I worked my way through getting a degree. I worked my way to getting my first job. And from age 13, I was basically independent. So you can imagine, I had the entrepreneurial bloodline to want to start my own company. So I got antsy real quick at age 28 and started my company and ran it for 10 years profitably and sold it to a VC and then went to Oakley. So that kind of was the path and pivot on my career.
So we've dropped some names here of business executives, luminaries, but ultimately, at the end of the day, who's been a hero or an inspiration for you in your career and what you've been able to do?
Uh, Undoubtedly, Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
Um, you know, people will say, and he's one of those embattled leaders but nobody can dispute the fact that he's a visionary, number one. Number two, that the vision actually was realized, which a lot of people don't realize how hard that is. There's a lot of people that talk about a vision, but nobody really executes it properly, or they don't stick to their vision. And that's the one thing I loved about Apple was they were relentless about not only visionary setting a vision, number one, but executing the vision with products that realize that vision. And also being authentic, meaning that they weren't going to sell inferior products because that's who they were not that type of brand. And as a result of that, they were not damaging their brand equity and they could last for generations. So there's many, I could talk and on with Steve, but there were just many things that he was very inspirational for me in particular, because he was very independent. He was a great leader. He was one that set the vision, executed that vision, and turned a company from ashes to the most valuable company on the planet. I mean, it's just beyond belief. Plus, on top of that, he went through adversity in order to come back and realize that dream that he had.
But I don't think a lot of people realize he was actually fired from his own
Yep.
company, you know? And then he came
Yeah.
back. I was running a couple computer labs for YMCA's in the early 2000s, and I put a grant out and got a bunch of iMacs at the time, these
Yeah.
sexy all-in-one machines. And I'm like, what the hell am I going to do with these?
Yeah.
Because we had gateways in there. No one
Right.
was doing Mac. The
Yeah.
iPod hadn't been out. None of this has came out. And then 3, 4 years later, they took over the world.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
weird how it has been kind of a Phoenix Rising story for them.
Yeah, and it's and I'll extend it because I'm a consumer products guy, and you get people wonder, well, why would Steve be your visionary? And it's just if you look at products, you look at packaging, you look at design, you look at authentication, you look at the pieces of the puzzle in order to realize a vision, and Steve executed all that, and you can adapt that to any industry, and you look at virtually any industry, what Steve had done and what he realized was something that everybody can do. I think that's really a again a thing that's lost a lot of times with Steve is he's not just realizing great products, he's realizing a great vision and a lifestyle that everybody wants to embrace. Your to your point, Joe, people it's the only product I know of where people keep the boxes.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, so it's you know that those are things that Steve smiles about is wow, I love the fact that they embrace everything we're doing.
That is wild because we do the same thing. We're holding on to all these boxes. And I
Yeah.
get to a point after because you have a shelf life, it's like, I got to get rid of these. But you
Yeah.
still, that's your impulse because it is, it's like, it's almost like an extension of the product. That's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's a good one.
So to become a business leader, one of the cornerstones is networking and getting knowledge and brilliance from others that are out there. Who's alive today that you are fascinated by that you would love to maybe spend time with or run into?
Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
I'm a people say I just finished my manuscript on my next book called The Visionary Leader, and I went through literally hundreds of visionaries, and when I look at people that you would like to intellectuals, people that have logic, people that have been through it, and people that have lived the life that others would aspire to be and kept it where it was. Clint was one of those I call kind of the brand authenticated, the authenticated brand, but coming from Hollywood. And I just thought it would just be an interesting conversation, sit down and have lunch with him because I just feel that he's so respected not only in the industry but the globally that he would be one that would be interesting to sit down with and have a conversation and lunch.
So I have a jazz radio show and his son Kyle is a
Yeah.
bass player. And I interviewed him at one point.
Okay. Cool.
And and
Yeah.
I and I tried not to I try when I talk to people that have been close to luminaries to not get into it because it's them. So we're just talking tangentially, and he starts bringing up one of his early experiences of going to the Montreux Jazz Festival,
Yeah.
having the press pass, running into Miles, running into all of these legends. And I'm just like, wait,
Yeah.
hold on a second here. You're just like hanging out with these people, and it's then I'm like, oh yeah, your dad's Clint.
Yeah.
Everybody back there is like Dirty Harry's backstage. It's
Right. Yeah, the last name Eastwood carries a lot of weight, I guess.
yeah.
But yeah, it's fun. I mean, that's what's different with me, Joe, is even though I've been in the business world and worked with global brands, I very much respect people, regardless of industry, how authentic they've been and how genuine they've been and how they've also given back. Like other people that I respect are Paul Newman, Robert Redford, people like that. And I don't look at them as actors. I looked at them as people that give back not only to their industry but to people that are looking for inspiration, not only in acting but in other roles.
I find that with the jazz community, there's some of the most gracious people in the world. The
Yeah,
higher up you go, the most humble they are. Like Sonny Rollins is a beautiful soul. I mean, he transcends so many levels of our human logic model that's just unreal. You get done
yeah,
talking to him and you're like, wow, I see the world in like
yeah,
a shade of sunlight that didn't exist before. And I'm sure
yeah,
Clint does the same thing. They just
yeah.
move the particles around them. I'm sure Steve did the same thing when he came in a room, everything just spun in a different way.
Yeah, it's just an interesting, you can get all kinds of business leaders, but I think when you get down to it, who would you like to talk to that's currently living that could really inspire you for what you can do and change in the world going forward? And I think Clint is just one of those guys that can do that.
So along with Clint and Steve, it's like the thing I think that's, and maybe it's just an old guy saying this, is that you get to a point in your life where you admire people that can do this for decades and decades. There's no end, and they continue to gain strength. And you've done that in your career. From the word go, you wanted out of North Dakota, you made your own business, you've continued, you haven't stopped. What has been that relentlessness for you? What has been the drive, the gas in the tank that's made you be consistently curious and growing as a business professional?
Well, I learned early on in my actually in my second role. It's interesting, and one of my bosses had said, "How do you learn so much in a short period of time?" And I said, this was one of my engineering days, and I said, "Well, I ask a million and one questions. I don't put my name on a piece of paper unless I understand what I'm writing." And this goes back to very detailed documents I was signing, but I always ask a million and one questions because I always want to be learning. In my philosophy is ABL is always be learning. And so for me, my passion has always been I get distracted easy and I find my interest level and I always set a 5 year, 10 year vision of where I want to be and how to achieve that step by step. So I'm very much following that path. Brian Tracy is one that I'd read almost every one of Brian's books, and Brian's been a very big inspiration for me. And I find that with people that I admire is that going back to Steve, he was bored. He wanted to keep doing things, and I use that as an example of what keeps me going is Steve would introduce products, and what I thought would be pretty ballsy for him to do with Apple was to move it from the marketplace at the height of its popularity, which is very unintuitive for a company that's trying to drive revenue as public. And so for me, I kind of have the same feeling as I've gone through life is what can I do and what do I want to do and what do I enjoy doing? That's a big thing for me, Joe, when I look at it is that am I enjoying, am I getting in front of the mirror today and say, am I enjoying what am I enjoying? Will I enjoy it 5 years from now? And I've always looked at life that way. And that's why I made that pivot early on from engineering to consumer products and started my own company because I knew I had to learn it. I couldn't just walk in to Oakley and say, hey, I want to work for you. They say, well, you have no experience. I walked in now with 10 years of experience as an entrepreneur and immediately got a job there and got a role with them where I was managing a division. So it was a kind of a shortcut to a long-term vision that I had. But it's kept me going for all this time, for the brands that I've been with as well as LiquidMind.
So, what would you say is one of your best professional triumphs that you've had professionally?
I would say taking over when I went to TaylorMade and Adidas, uh, they the categories that I had, which in this case were what they were called soft goods and accessories, were kind of floundering, believe it or not. And they didn't have anybody that had set a vision for the product and where it was supposed to go and how to place it and how to position it in the marketplace. So we took over about an $8-9 million business and grew it to over 55 million over 3 years. So and that to me is an accomplishment of the team that we hired and the vision that we set in the very beginning because we executed against the vision. So when I look at success, when you mentioned that, Joe, I don't necessarily look at numbers. I just look at how close were you at the end of the cycle of your vision of 5 years to achieving the result you were expecting. And if you can look back and say, we overachieved, then I consider that to be one of your greatest accomplishments.
So, let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into that young, hungry kid, that version of you from North Dakota.
Yeah.
You can give that version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've led, the wisdom you've gained, the roads you've been down. What
Yeah.
advice would you impart on that young version of you?
I would say number one is always be learning, always be asking questions. And the third would be patient, humble, and respectful. the young tiger in you is very confident. So you want to move faster than a lot of people. And I find these and I've been around a few of them. I'm on the board of a couple companies and I see these young tigers coming in and I go, you know what? That was me at a young age. And and I get it because they want to move fast, but you have to also understand the culture of the business, they respect the team that's currently there, help them move along in that process as you realize that vision that you have. And always be learning is that when you go to your next role, you'll be more valuable to that company if you keep asking questions and you keep learning and keeping up to date with where the industry is going, not where it's been.
So, as a leader, you've had to dispense good advice to those around you, to employees. But what's the best advice you've ever gotten?
I would say I have to think about that one because um, I've actually gotten quite a bit of good advice from people that I haven't actually met. So, for people that I met, I would also say that it would be when you get into a role, exceed expectations that they may have, but understand the expectations that they have. And I say that as an oxymoron, but I say it from the standpoint of when people hire you, there's an expectation of what the role entails. But your job and an opportunity is to exceed those expectations as long as you understand what those are. And many times people feel that they're exceeding expectation, but in actual reality, they're not. And so I get advice on that side of it is that how do I move up in a role? How do I move up inside of a company? And that was probably the best advice that I had is exceed expectations.
So, at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, colleagues, clients, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Well, I would say personality trait is what you see is what you get. I love that side of it is that there's nothing behind the scenes that's, you know, I'm different off the camera than I am on the camera. The second one is very detail orientated, but also very vision driven. So I have the fortunately blessed with the ability to set a vision, but also understand the steps to execute it. I think that's something that I've been really blessed with, and I can pass that on to those that are looking to be able to do the same thing. And that for me is a real blessing. And I why I kind of moved into consumer products was um, being an engineer, it gave me the detail orientation, but I'm very outgoing, and marketing is a big part of what I do, and also product creation. And so for me, I needed to kind of release that, and I was able to do that through consumer products.
So, we get off the call here, time machine pulls up in front of your house. You can either go back in time and see one event in human history, or you can go into the future and see what's up. Where are you going to go? What do you want to see?
I want to see the future.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a vision forward thinking guy. So I always kind of want to know, hey, plant me in year 2032 and let me see what's out there. And because I like to see the evolution of products, of services, of the globe as a whole, and people and humanity. And so for me, that's kind of the thing that's more intriguing to me would to see what's out in the future.
So, Liquid Mind is the business. Your
Yeah.
podcast is Visionary Chronicles. If anybody wants to get involved with anything related to your world, where is the best place to go to do that?
I would say Liquid Mind site, LiquidMindsite.com. Contact information there. We do have free meetings too, Joe, for our team. Just plug in your question and set up a free meeting. We did also just finish the Visionary Brand Master Course, and that's at thevisionaryfiles.com. So we've got entrepreneurs and business leaders that are now taking the course at the Visionary Files. So we proud to say we finished that in January of this year as well. So and then the next thing is coming down the pipe is the Visionary Leader is the next book I have being released next year. So hopefully that'll be as successful as the first one was. So we were blessed to have a good success with the first one.
Excellent. Brian, this has been wonderful. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your stories, your wisdom. Best of luck with all your endeavors. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.